To people who aren't aware, there's a location in the Western Sahara Desert of Mauritania called the Rishat structure. It's also commonly referred to as the Eye of the Sahara. It is a site that most people have never seen or heard of before, which is truly peculiar because it's so spectacular. It's a site that astronauts typically use to reference from space. It is a geological feature that is said to be volcanic in nature. And what's so spectacular about this is that it just so happens to match more than a dozen striking similarities to what Plato had described as the lost ancient capital city of Atlantis.
I almost feel like we're not going to do your video justice by just talking about it, because the video is so good and you go into so many details. By the end of it, my jaw was dropped. I was like, holy shit. Like, from what you had the last time you were on the podcast to what you put out now, it's even more compelling. Like, way more compelling.
I appreciate you saying that. And I guess to anyone that wants to check it out, I have a YouTube channel called Bright Insight. It's right at the top of the page. And it says, Lost Ancient Roman Map has Atlantis and Sahara, Africa. And that's kind of where it goes from there, is that there is a... Actually, let me just mention real quick. Like, you're a very inquisitive individual. You have many interesting people that come and chat with you. And when I had asked you last time, you said that until you had saw my video, you'd never seen or heard of the Rishat structure.
Never heard of it, yeah.
Anytime I meet somebody new, or if I'm at some party and be like, oh, what do you do? And we start chatting about YouTube, the first thing I do now is I show them a picture of the Rishat. And I've never, not once, ever come across one single person that has seen or heard of it before, other than people who are familiar with what I've shared.
But there's so many things, like the where the water flows to the south, where there's clear evidence of water erosion that took place after the volcano. There's so much that points to that possibly being Atlantis.
It's spectacular. So just to run down real quick, Plato had described Atlantis as being the capital. Let me just mention that, because it was an empire said to be made up of 10 kingdoms. And what I'm focusing on is the lost capital city, which was said to be made up of concentric circles, 3 of water, 2 of land, which matches the Rishat structure. It also was said to have an opening to the sea at the south. And if you look at it from satellite imagery, you can clearly see that water had ran through it.
Let's take a look at that. Tell Jamie what image to pull up so we can...
And furthermore, it was said to have mountains to the north, and you just so happen to have mountains called the Atlas mountain chain, which Atlas was said to be the very first king of Atlantis. And what's interesting is that the very first known king of Mauritania, which is where the Rishat structure is located, is also... Their very first known king was also named Atlas. And though I'm not saying that that's the same individual, but what we do today is we pass down names, right? Like, people like, oh, my dad's name's John, and so is my son. And so it's another striking similarity, but it goes further than that. Like, there's geological similarities, such as the fact that Atlantis was said to be made up of red, black, and white color stone, which is another similarity you see at the Rishat structure. It was said to have an abundance of gold, and that the outer walls were lined with it. And it turns out that Mauritania is loaded with gold, and not only that, the richest person ever known to exist in all of mankind is Mansa Musa of the Mali Empire, which consisted partly of modern-day Mauritania. And he was so rich from gold that he would be richer than Elon Musk and, like, Bezos combined almost. Like, many unfathomable amount of billions of dollars. So that's another similarity.
What year was this?
Oh, this is 1300s or 1400s.
There he is.
Yeah, there we are. 1312, 1337.
What a great name, too. Mansa Musa.
But the similarities don't end there. There was said to be an abundance of elephants, which is one reason why to suggest that Atlantis would have been in Africa is because, well, besides the fact that elephants are known to be throughout Africa, they used to be in Mauritania. They're unfortunately pretty much extinct there today. But another little detail that most people aren't aware of, because they think of Atlantis like, oh, it must be at the bottom of the ocean. Well, that's not exactly how Plato worded it. He did describe that the aftermath of Atlantis followed a catastrophic event involving water. Is that what was left of Atlantis was reeds of grass and a shoal of mud that prevented ships from navigating to and from. And what people don't realize is that Sahara Africa, up until about 4,500 to 5,000 years ago, was totally green. It was tropical. It had the largest network, or one of the largest networks of rivers ever known to exist. It had the largest freshwater lake ever known to exist, which is Mega Lake Chad, which, just to put this into perspective, it is, if you take all the North American Great Lakes combined, that's 94,000 square miles of surface area, whereas Mega Lake Chad was 139,000.
Whoa.
Massive. Additionally, Atlantis, the capital, was said to have a river that went just north of it or next to it, and the Tamanrasset River went right through the Rishat structure, or just north of it, went all the way to the Atlas Mountains that I described, which is in modern-day Morocco. And the evidence is that it existed at that same period of time when Atlantis was said to be around 11,600 years ago prior to its destruction, up until about 5,000 years ago. So going back to my point, like, a lot of people see the Sahara Desert and they don't realize that this place was unbelievably different than it is today. And one of the things that's so important is that I know some people listening will, they hear Atlantis, they think, oh, it didn't exist.
Right.
Whether it existed or not, the evidence that we're going to chat about today to show you that there is conclusive evidence, I would say, that catastrophic water erosion, that the ocean had blasted through the Sahara tens of millions of years more recently than previously known. According to the science, 56 to 66 million years ago was the time of the Trans-Saharan Seaway, which was the last time the ocean blasted through it. However, there are a few lines of evidence that say otherwise. Besides the fact that anyone that looks at the Sahara Desert through the Google Earth app, you can see fluvial striations, which is signature traits of water erosion. This is confirmed by other experts that look into these things. I like to mention Randall Carlson. Mm-hmm. He's someone that's analyzed the area and has said, yes, this is catastrophic water erosion. One of the signature lines of evidence that suggests that the ocean blasted through it far more recently was the largest volcano in Sahara Africa is in Chad. It's Mount Kusi, and there's a lava flow that goes through it that is dated at 12,000 or so years ago. The volcano itself is supposed to be somewhere between 1.2 and 2.3 million years ago. But if you look at Mount Kusi to the south, you can see, and I don't know, Jamie, if you're able to bring up one of the photos of that mountain chain, but you can see that the water erosion cuts off that lava flow directly to the south. Yeah, keep going over. A little bit right there. Okay, so go over a couple. That is the mountain, and you can see those striations, which are signature traits of water erosion. All those white blemishes are salt, and I should point out real quick that it is a confirmed fact that much of the Sahara has surface level salt. And you see those white blemishes on that mountain? That is not clouds. That is not snow. Those are salt deposits.
And surface level salt that would have been from the ocean?
That is what I suggest, because in the middle of that caldera, you have huge patches of salt. And is it reasonable to suggest that that salt existed before the creation of that volcano? Because it seems to me that all that that salt would burn up.
Right.
And not only that, there is scientific studies that show that there are gastropods, which are sea life, that existed inside that caldera that used to be 1,000 feet deep and dried up just a few thousand years ago. So the fact that this is an 11,000-foot volcano that has salt on top of it, I would say is corresponding evidence that the ocean had once went through it. And if you go over a couple more images, Jamie, you will see far better images that show you that. Okay, so notice how it cuts off. You see to the black right here? That is a lava flow that's dated around 12,000 or so years ago. And regardless of whether the volcano or that water erosion happened 12,000 years ago or 2 million years ago, that in itself is evidence that the ocean blasted through the Sahara Desert literally 50 to 60 million years more recently than previously known. And the implications of this, as far as climate science, as far as the topic of geology and cataclysms, cannot be overstated. I mean, does it not look like that lava flow was cut off by whatever type of erosion that is? Does it? I mean, that's...
Yeah, completely. Yeah, it's such a clean line. And it aligns with all the water erosion marks that are to the left of it. Can you make that smaller, Jamie? Can you make it, stretch it out? Yeah.
And... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Nothing. It's just like you could really clearly see that it looks like a line, like a water line passed through what was marked by the volcanic eruption.
And this is one thing I say, I'm like, it's visible to anyone that has eyes to see, but it turns out that the Sahara Desert is one of the least studied places on Earth, mostly because it's so inhospitable. It's an average of 125 degrees Fahrenheit much of the year. It is so unbelievably big that just to get out there, I mean, you need reliable aircraft or vehicles. Most of the countries out there are, I regret to say, third world in that you just don't have supplies. It's not feasible to just travel out there with a whole team on a whim. So most of it is essentially undocumented, and it's not a site the Sahara as a whole isn't a site that gets much attention, unfortunately.
Ben, we got to bring you in, otherwise it's going to talk forever.
Yeah. No, I was going to say something that you mentioned about the origin of, I guess, Plato's description. You said it was mud and grasses was like the aftermath. It's interesting. It's the topic I've been exploring recently. Is that does match some of the translations of origin stories from the ancient Egyptians. So it's like that the Temple of Horus at Edfu, it's this amazing structure, but it's literally covered head to toe in hieroglyphs and descriptions and all these types of things. But one of the stories in the translations they do talk about is this, what they would call the original point, or the primordial mound, the primordial island. They describe it as being an island that was surrounded by water that was sinking, and essentially these reeds that were growing on it that created a falcon's perch, and then the god, it was either Horus or Horun, one of the falcon gods, alights on this perch and then gains divinity. But as part of that story, I mean, they and then he goes and forms Kemet, essentially the motherland Egypt, and it's this tale of them, I guess, their civilization moving and migrating to this new land. But they do talk about a whole stack of unknown gods and a whole culture that existed before that. It's an interesting correlation. It's something that Graham Hancock speculated about in his work with the Temple of Horus at Edfu. They also have catastrophic flood myths and things like this. But it may be that whatever prior civilization, and that's might have been where the dynastic Egyptians actually got their origins from, because it seems clear that they've inherited some things from the past. That's a story they themselves tell.
Yeah, I wasn't aware that the story of Atlantis had come from Egypt.
That's one of the most bizarre parts about it. I didn't know this until just a few years ago either. It's like, oh, wait a second. Plato, his distant relative Solon had traveled there in search of knowledge because Egypt was the place to go for it. And it was the priests of the Delta that told Solon. And they said that, so 6,000 years, or 9,000 years, prior to the time of Solon was when the sinking of this city happened. And that works out to be 9,600 BC, so 11,600 years ago, which is bang on exactly where now the geological evidence points to basically the end of the Younger Dryas cataclysms. Like we know something happened at the start at like 12,800, 900 years, and then 11,600 years ago was that end of the Younger Dryas that brought us up out of the cold spell and into the Holocene.
Isn't it crazy that that's a full 1,000 years, and we think about it in like the same time period? Like, around that time.
I know. Just
we're
playing around with it.
literally 11,600 to 12,800. We're literally talking about 1,000 fucking years.
It is.
It's so much time.
It's so much time that actually, if you go from 12,008, so basically, let's say 1,200 years. The English language, Old English, is only like 1,400 years, and Modern English is only like 400 or 500 years. So this is such a wide, a long period of time that we weren't even speaking the same language that in that same 1,000 years ago. When you think of it like that, it's a different world.
It's nuts. And if you think about the people that lived 1,000 years ago and how they lived,
I don't know Jimmy personally. I like the guy without knowing him. I'd like to get him out in the field with me and show him some stuff firsthand. I bet
he would love that.
I think
he's
he
a
would.
giant fan of your work.
I like to hear that. Well, I'm a fan of his work, but I don't happen to agree on this one.
Well, I don't even know if he agrees. I think he's just speculating.
Yeah.
He's not dogmatic. Like, he doesn't have like a rigid perspective on this.
Yeah, here you can see there's the recap structure. What is interesting, though, is look at this. You've got this structure up here, the terminate tenoma. I forget how you pronounce that. I knew how to pronounce it, but anyways, that's an impact crater there. There's one here. We can actually, if we go back, the Tenumer crater in Mauritania, that's impact, and the Temimichat.
That's it.
So what's interesting, though, check this out. There's one, there's two, and here's the recat structure. They fall in a perfect alignment. Now, what's the explanation there? I don't know.
Could just be coincidence, right?
Could be coincidence, yeah. Could be coincidence.
One of the things that he said about the recut structure was that around it, the white appears to be salt.
Which could be. And see, the rim rock of this is late Cretaceous, about 90 million years old. So at that point, it was below the ocean, right? So it's been uplifted. I think this thing is about 1,400 or 1,500 feet above sea level, if memory serves me correct. So it's been eroded. You see, this whole thing here is like an erosion. You had a massive amount of water that came down over this, and most likely is what exposed this thing to the surface. It was probably buried. Let's see here. So right there is, from Plato, that's the ringed city of Atlantis to scale.
The concentric rings.
The concentric ring. So this is the actual scale superimposed onto the recap structure.
So it's much smaller in scale.
Yeah.
But Plato's scale was based on what?
The stade. It was based on the stade, which is roughly 607 feet. It's where we get the word stadium from.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because that was the length of a stadium in ancient Greece.
So when you look at Plato's version of this, sorry to take you on this detour, but I was just curious. When you look at Plato's version of Atlantis, is there an area of the world that seems likely? Yeah?
Yeah. You better watch my 6-hour presentation,
Okay,
Joe.
I will.
Yeah, no, but I look, it's detailed. That's why even in 6 hours, I can't really spell it. In my podcast I did, the first 9 episodes, 2 hours each, were devoted to, I thought, well, let's kick it off with Atlantis.
18 hours of Atlantis.
18 hours of it. The last episode 9 was devoted to the recap structure.
Wow.
So I had eight hours, so 16 hours, but we had some chatter and things like that in there, so maybe more like 12 or 14 hours. So you know who Johanna James is?
No.
She is a British actress who started doing this She's a really cool lady. She's very interested in all this kind of stuff. Very smart, extraordinarily beautiful. And she went on and did she does these like 20-minute, 30-minute little vignettes of things that she's really interested in, having to do a lot with, ancient cultures, all the kind of things that, Graham Hancock is, she reads Graham Hancock. She became a fan of mine, and she devoted one of her little 20 or 30-minute segments to, she said, I watched all 10 hours or 12 hours of Randall Carlson's programs on Atlantis. And so she did this like 30-minute little synopsis of it. Really did a great job. So we reached out to her. I invited her on. She came on. We did a live stream a couple of weeks ago with her as a guest. And just really fun lady. She's also does comedy.
Really?
Yeah. And she's very intelligent, very gorgeous. What can I say? And smart and interested in all this kind of stuff. So, there we go. Anyways, so she was very interested in the whole Atlantis thing. And so because of that, there was a lot of feedback and people wanting to know more. And so I thought, okay, now the 10 or 12 hours I did, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to condense that down. So a couple of weeks ago, we did the first 3-hour live stream where I basically started breaking down Plato's account line by line. What did he actually say? Let's look at the geology. Let's look at the geography, the oceanography, the astronomy, and see if it lines up, if it matches up. And so I think there's one place that pretty much is not all the details, but when you look at all of the areas around the planet that have been proposed for Atlantis, I think there's one place that fits the majority of his details, and that's the sunken Azores Plateau. And I say sunken because we know it's sunken, and it's right along the mid-Atlantic ridge. In fact, since we're on this subject, and I wasn't even thinking we'd get on this subject, there's the Azores Plateau right there. It straddles a triple plate junction, which you have the European plate, the African plate, and the North American plate here.
Well, it's up near Nova Scotia?
Yeah, it's far north. It is. But notice over here, it's really almost at the same latitude as Spain. See? And I would say that if there's any place on the planet that is most consistent with Plato's account, that's it right there.
Why is that? Without doing an 18-hour presentation.
Oh, come on, Joe. Can't we have pizza brought in?
We can.
Nah, that's why, in a nutshell, God, where do I even begin? So, I was afraid you were going to ask that, but we can look very quickly, I guess, like give you the 5-minute version, which is that there is evidence that there was a massive subsidence along the mid-Atlantic ridge. We actually talked about this a little bit, and I think in our very first discussion we had, which was what, 7-8 years ago?
At least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we talked about this a little bit. Geophysics shows that there's horizontal movement, lateral movement of the Earth's crust because of continental drift, but there's also vertical movement. And that is the result of isostatic compensation. That's called isostasy, is the vertical movement of the Earth's crust. I can show you, I should have a slide right here that will help to really illustrate what it is. Let me back up to, let's see. Should be right in here. Here we go. Okay, so now this is the shore of Hudson Bay. Now this is where the ice sheet was the thickest, right? Now what are you seeing there? Hudson Bay is up here. These are shorelines because when the ice was removed, the land started rising back. So here's sea level, right? Land is rising back.
And the land is rising because of a lack of weight of the ice?
Yes.
Oh.
Right. So you're sitting on a soft, cushiony chair right now, right? Are you?
Yep.
Okay. So your ass is causing isostatic depression of that cushion on your chair.
Right.
And if you sit up, you'll have isostatic compensation. Right?
So that's what that is along many, many, many lines.
Yes, those are all shorelines. Wow. Here's another view of it.
Wow.
Here's another view.
Wow.
That's the land rebounding a couple of thousand feet after the ice was removed. Now, the ice was removed, and all of those trillions of tons of weight, where did it go? In the Atlantic Ocean. Now, you look, the thinnest crust on the Earth is the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. And if you look at it, you'll see that there are transform faults, which should show up right here. The transform faults are these vertical fault lines that are what you would say orthogonal or right angles to the ridge itself. Here you can see very clearly the triple plate junction and how the Azores Plateau. Okay, well, since the 1940s, the first expedition in 1948, there was when they started doing dredge samples from the floor of the Atlantic Ocean, which coincidentally, the name of the ship was the Atlantis. They dredge core samples, and they pull up the core samples from 2 miles down, a mile to 2 miles down, and they look at those core samples. And what you had was, for example, shallow water creatures living. They weren't living. They were now, they had been drowned. You had creatures like that typically lived under 100 feet of seawater. And now they're a mile and a half below. And they're on the flanks of this place right here.
So these are fossils that they're finding?
Yes.
And they're finding fossils that ordinarily you would find in some place that was very shallow.
Very shallow. Very shallow, yes.
Or relatively shallow, 100 feet.
100 feet, yes. So this is the basic idea here. This goes back to the 60s. As it says right here, the possible tectonic implications of glacial-eustatic. Now, eustatic is the rise and fall of sea level correlated with the increase and decrease of glacial ice. So if the ice is increasing, sea level is falling, and we call that eustatic sea level fall. If the ice is shrinking, melting, sea level's rising. So that's a eustatic rise. So that's the meaning of that. When you see glacial-eustatic, that means the rise and fall of the sea level as a result of glacier growth or melting. Okay? And it says here, sea level fluctuations have received only minor attention in connection with such problems as ocean floor spreading. The purpose of this report is to point out that late Pleistocene sea level data suggest that the ocean basins have responded isostatically and by a significant amount, particularly concentrated along the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. So, I've got so much here. I'm just going to grab a couple of these things here. Yeah. So they dug up these cobbles, which are, the cobbles are, so a cobble is basically a stone or anything that's lithified that's roughly between a pebble and a boulder. A boulder, when you get, I think, to 11 inches, about the size of a volleyball, now you're in the realm of boulders. A cobble is in between pebbles and boulders, like you've heard of cobblestone streets, they're fist-sized rocks, basically. So they say here the Atlantis cruiser and great meteor seamounts rise from a broad ridge or plateau, which extends from the mid-Atlantic ridge, blah, blah, blah. Let's see. So about a ton of flat pteropod limestone cobbles was dredged from the summit area of one of these sunken, what they're calling the seamounts. And a seamount is like a flat-topped mountain, right? Like the top of the mountain has been sheared off, okay? So they pulled up these limestones, right? These limestone cobbles. They dated them. One of the cobbles gave an apparent radiocarbon age of 12,000 years, plus or minus 900 years. The state of lithification, how much it is turned into rock, of the limestone suggests that it may have been lithified under subaerial conditions. In other words, in the atmosphere. That's what that means. It may have been lithified under subaerial conditions, and the seamount may have been an island within the past 12,000 years.
Wow.
So, I mean, we could go through, again, hours of this kind of research. And why it's been pushed off to the side is anybody's guess. But it just doesn't fit the paradigm. But, yeah, basically, now this doesn't prove that there was any civilization there, but we can make a very strong case that a large section of the Azores Plateau was above sea level during the late glacial maximum.
Does it coincide with Plato's account of trade and of travel and of the way?
Well, we have no way of knowing. See, now there we have to make a leap of faith, which is this. If we look right here, you'll see, you can see it very clearly, and you can see the Straits of Gibraltar here, which was anciently known as the Pillars of Heracles. And you come here to a group of islands, and then you get to the Azores Plateau. And here, these down here are those seamounts, those truncated seamounts. So really all you have to do, here's the leap of faith you have to make. You have to go, now I don't get into anything like, whatever, flying spaceships or crystal ray guns or anything like that. No, I just go by what Plato says. What he's describing is a maritime culture that had navigational abilities. Something along the lines of the Minoan or the Phoenician culture, maybe by an order of magnitude, right? So now all we have to do really is assume this, which to me is not so pseudoscientific that we couldn't even consider it, which is that somebody, some group in the Ice Age had enough navigational skills to sail from Europe to islands right here.
If you enjoyed today's episode on JRE Plus, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you.